Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for yet another edition of Roadmap to Organizational Strategy on Amalgate Radio Communications. My name is Tolu Omadara. Hope your week has been good thus far, and hope you are rounding off the month of July with some strategic introspections, evaluations, restructuring if necessary, and all the things that we have been sharing with you thus far. Hopefully, they are guiding you at the very minimum to reevaluate, and then as you proceed with the reevaluations based on whatever deductions you make, hopefully you can then proceed or you can continue to some redesigns or restructuring or re-strategizing. It's a lot of right? Anyway, for those of you that have been with us, we thank you so much. That have been with us on previous episodes. We thank you so much. For those that are just joining for the first time, we don't take your presence for granted. We appreciate you. You are the reason why we do this. If you do all of the research and the analysis and the data gathering, and we put all of this together, and you are not here, then it's all a waste. So thank you so much. Now, either you've been joining us before or you're just joining us, I want to go back to the DIME framework. Remember the Amalgate strategic planning framework or strategy framework. That's D for developing of the strategy, I for implementation of the strategy, M for monitoring of the strategy, and then E for evaluation of the strategy. Now, the DIME is the more or less like the core of it, but there's an extension there which we name the R, right? So it could either be the DIME framework, which is the core, and sometimes it could be the DIMA framework, where you then have the R, which is the reinvention. I had to allude to that because of all of the re's that I mentioned a few moments ago, the re-evaluation and the re-strategizing and the restructuring. Ultimately, you do not stand in one place in strategy. With strategy, you should be responsive. You should be responding both to changing market dynamics or to the changing political environment, as well as also responding to the evolution of your own internal and external strengths and weaknesses, right? The ones that are highly internal and the ones that are sort of informed by external occurrences. This is very, very important, right? You do not create a strategy so that it can be static. No way. One of the things we said last week is that you must be continuously evaluating, even if you call it a 5-year strategy or a 10-year strategy or a 3-year strategy. You should ultimately be evaluating at least annually, and also, honestly, I would also say quarterly. Of course, the intensity of your quarterly evaluation may not measure up to, or may not be the same as that of your annual evaluation, but you should also be meeting quarterly to say, what are we doing, where are we, what change the market, what should we be responding to, and what should we be maintaining as it is. Once again, thank you very much for doing this with us. Thank you very much for being here with us. And we are going to begin by doing a little bit of recap of last week, right? I've alluded to one or two, but I also want to go a little bit deeper into some of the high points of last week's episode. Now, last week we started by looking at what is strategy, and today we are going to sort of consolidate on that, right? Now, we said top leadership has the overall accountability for strategy creation. Remember the D, the development. Another word for that can be creation, right? So definitely top leadership has the overall accountability for strategy creation. However, a strategy that is going to be effectively implemented would have to be extensively co-created. Please take note of that. A strategy that is going to be effectively implemented would have to be extensively co-created. So whether you're top leadership, that you're accountable for the entire process, or you're middle level leadership, or you're just growing and you're a potential leader, it's important to know that strategy is a highly collective process, right? For top leaders, one of the things we said last week is that if you create strategy all by yourself in the name of being top leadership, the chances of it getting executed would be significantly limited. I'll say that again. If you create strategy all by yourself in the name of being top leadership, the chances of it getting executed will be significantly limited, right? Now, coming to the heart of the D, right, the development. We also alluded to the SWOT framework. This is a framework that has been in existence for a long time in the strategy world, right? That's the SWOT there standing for your strengths, S for strength, W for weaknesses, O for opportunities, and T for threats. Now, the S and the W, the strengths and weaknesses, are largely internal, and the opportunities and threats could be said to be very external. So, one of the things you do when you're developing a strategy, I think 2 episodes ago we emphasized the fact that a strategy creation process has to commence with a lot of assessment, internal and external assessment, because and we're beginning to get deep into what is strategy again, even as we do a recap, because essentially when you're creating a strategy, you are trying to look at what are the opportunities in the market that you want to consolidate on, leveraging on your your if I can use that tautology, your strongest strength. In other words, the best of your strengths, right? Because there can be and there would be multiple opportunities in the market, right? Same thing in the public sector. There would be several opportunities to either consolidate your legacy as a public sector leader or to strengthen your institutions and so on and so forth. There would be several opportunities. The question is, which of those opportunities do you want to consolidate on? Which of those opportunities do you want to leverage, right? And that's where the assessment of your internal strengths and weaknesses comes in, because ideally you should be matching the if you like, the most excellent of your strengths, right? You should be matching the most if I can use that word, the most leverage in inducing parts of your strength, the ones that can give you the utmost leverage in the market. You should be matching them to the opportunities. So let me give you an example. Let's say you are in a market where, for instance, the opportunity for energy or energy diversification is high, right? In the state of California, for instance, I was reading yesterday that California has basically done without, that's California in the United States. They've basically put away all of the coal energy channels that they have. They decided to let go of virtually, I think, all but one. And so what they do essentially is that they are significantly increasing the amount of their energy sources that comes through renewable channels. So that's a state that is highly consolidating on renewable energy. Now, if you are based around California in the United States, and then you have probably already started planning for renewable energy, and then you see that, okay, this state's consolidating on this, you may want to look at your organization, look at where you are, look at which of the renewable energy sources that you probably have the most advantage in, because there are many renewable energy sources. There is wind, there is solar, and so on and so forth. There's offshore wind, even in the wind, there's onshore wind, right? So you probably want to look at which of these you have the greatest advantage in and match it to the opportunities in the market, right? So when you do that in external assessment and internal, especially for in terms of opportunities and threats, remember those are largely external. When you also want to match them with the greatest of your own strengths as much as possible, and that's where the internal assessment comes in. So before you eventually arrive at that aha moment, which strategy is supposed to be? Strategy is supposed to be like a light bulb. This is one of the things we said last week, right? Before you arrive at that aha moment, you need to know what are the opportunities in the market that you're trying to take advantage of, as well as the threats. There are also threats, right? Let's come to let me continue with this example so we have more clarity on it. So right now, there is the threat of a political transition in the United States that may not favor wind energy. The Biden administration has been heavily invested in wind energy, and that has been an opportunity for organizations, firms that are aligned with renewable sources, right? Or that are building on renewable sources, or who have advantage and strengths in renewable energy. Now, should Trump become the next president of the United States, right? Should he be restored or should he be back in the Oval Office? That industry, the offshore wind energy industry and renewable energy sector generally, is concerned that he's going to undo much of the policy progress that has been attained in the United States under the Biden administration. So that's a threat in the market. That's the reality. So when you are strategizing, you have to be fully aware, as you know, you must have a very deep and broad understanding of the opportunities in the market, especially your own sector, your own industry, as well as the different factors that could impact your own industry, as well as the threats. You need both in order to fashion a strategy. Take note of that word fashion. It's still like saying you are creating a strategy. Strategy can be a highly creative process because it's not like it's existed before. Remember what we said last week? If you are doing what you're doing exactly the way, if you're doing exactly what organizations or what other organizations are doing exactly the same way other organizations are doing them, then you may not have a strategy. A strategy is supposed to be unique to your specific composition of internal strengths and weaknesses as they are responding to the broad array of external opportunities and threats in your own market as well as your own sector, right? This is still Tolu Omoder on Amoge Radio Communications. This is Roadmap to Organizational Strategy. We are doing a recap of some of the things we discussed last week, and in the process, we are also beginning to share new insights. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll be back shortly. Okay, so let's proceed again to the recap. We're trying to conclude the recap of some of last week's highlights now. Now, of course, last week we said that you cannot be apologetic about your strength as an organization, because you cannot consolidate on the strength you're apologetic about, right? If your strength is renewable energy, for instance, and if within the renewable energy you're especially good in offshore wind, then there is nothing to be apologetic about. You have to take note of your strengths and consolidate on your strengths, except to become strategic for you to begin to build other strengths. And that's why we talk about present and potential opportunities, and we'll come back to that later, right? There are times definitely when you have to begin to build other strengths because you can see the market evolving. And this is where monitoring comes in again. I'm going to talk a lot about assessing the market, monitoring the market, being on top and ahead of changes in the market. It's a very important part of the strategy process. As a matter of fact, it may be one of the strongest takeaway from today's episode. They need to be ahead of changes in your market. They need to be ahead of evolutions in your industry. It's extremely important. Your strategy cannot be outdated. Your strategy cannot be backdated. I think it was my colleague Adekoji Jayoba who was talking about leadership competencies and organizational behavior. That's a program we need to stay connected to. Right, it runs every Monday on Amoge Radio Communications, and we have great programs, by the way, every Monday through Friday on Amoge Radio Communications. Please be reminded of that. So she was saying in leadership competence and organizational behavior, she was discussing Amoge's unique leadership competency framework, the one we created, and she mentioned the need to be updated. Right, she said, as a leader, you cannot be, or as part of the leadership, you cannot be outdated. You cannot be running an analog strategy when the world has gone very digital and highly technological. Now, why is this important? Because your strategy, sometimes that's why I have been emphasizing the need to review your strategy constantly. Because sometimes your strategy was created, for instance, in a world that didn't have the Ukraine war. Right? If you created a strategy 4 or 5 years ago, before the Ukraine war and before the Israel war, and the environment of your business has changed, for instance, let's say that still using the energy industry, will probably continue with that analogy and example, and that to the end of today's episode. Now, before 3-5 years ago, Russia, for instance, was not transacting business as directly with China as they currently are. Before 3-5 years ago, we didn't have Russia learning how to respond to the sanctions by the West as much as they are currently doing. And so maybe everything was heavily dollarized before 3-5 years ago. Now you find Russia and China transacting more with other currencies, and the US is the US dollar is probably no longer as predominant in your environment, probably in the energy world, in the energy industry, as it currently is. What does that mean for your strategy? What does that mean for the strategy you created 3-5 years ago, pre-Russia war? That means that you have to go back to the assumptions, because for every strategy you create, there are certain underlying assumptions. I repeat, for every strategy you create, there are certain underlying assumptions. When you evaluate the market, when you evaluate the internal and external environment of your business, and there are certain assumptions you make on the basis of which we go ahead to create your strategy, right? The development. Now let's go to the end of the DIMA cycle. the reinvention. Why do you need to reinvent sometimes? Because if those assumptions have changed significantly, then it's important to evaluate the strategy and say, if the assumptions on which we created the strategy have changed significantly, for instance, let's go to the Nigerian market, for instance. Let's say you're operating in the Nigerian energy market and you created a strategy 3 years ago under the previous administration, the Buhari administration, when $1 was equivalent to about 500 naira, I beg your pardon. And now that has tripled. On an average, the $1 is now about 1,500 naira. That has tripled significantly. Now, if you were importing a lot of your for instance your processed oil, right? You're in the energy industry in Nigeria, which is as of today, unfortunately, I must say, is largely reliant on only on a mono source of energy, which is petroleum, right? Now, if that was the assumption on which you created your strategy 3-5 years ago under the Buhari administration, and then all of a sudden under the current administration, that assumption has changed. It has the exchange rate has more or less tripled. What do you do with your strategy? Are you going to continue with that strategy? Are you going to carry on with that strategy the way as it is? I dare say no. I dare say there's a 90% chance that you have to re-examine the assumptions based on which you created your strategy, as certain things have changed fundamentally and significantly. This is still Tolu Omodara on Navigate Radio Communications. We are looking at roadmap to organizational strategy, and we are still looking at the issue of what is strategy. We are recapping some of the things we did last week, and the process also sharing new knowledge and emphasizing significantly the need to continuously evaluate and re-evaluate your market. A strategy is supposed to be a light bulb. A light bulb on what? What are you shining the light bulb on? You are shining the light bulb, don't forget, on the maze. The external environment can be a maze. Last week we took a dictionary definition of a maze, and we emphasized the fact that it can be a very complex and hard to decipher environment, right? So when you look at that maze and you say, oh, how are we going to find our way through this maze? How is the organization going to find the way through this maze? This political maze, this economic maze, this geopolitical maze, and so on and so forth, right? That's where the strategy comes in. The strategy is supposed to shine a light on that intricate environment or on that complex space, right? That's what a strategy should do. You're supposed to shine that light, but you have to understand the maze you're trying to shine the light on, right? If you don't understand the maze, sometimes you don't even know which aspect of the maze you need to shine a light on, because within that maze, there may be specific segments or specific parts of the maze that are highly complex, where you have the tightest knots, KNOTS, right? And if you can untangle those knots, all of a sudden the maze can become a net instead of a maze. But if you do not understand that maze, how do you know where to shine the light on? It's very important. So you need to know that you're dealing with a complex environment, largely, many times, right? Whether you're in the private sector, in the public sector, or even the non-profit sector, you need to understand the complexity of the maze you're trying to shine a light on, that you're trying to find your way around, that you're trying to resolve, that you're trying to untangle. So if you do not understand that, then how can you say you're quote unquote fabricating the strategy? How can you say you're at creating a strategy, you are articulating a strategy to shine a light on a maze that you don't understand? Very, very, very important, right? Like I said, one of the strongest takeaways from today's episode, as far as I'm concerned, should be the need to understand the environment of business, the environment of the organization's operations. Extremely important. You need to understand the strategy that you're trying to shine a light. The environment that you're trying to shine a light on, the maze that you're trying to throw a way out of, right? So again, last week we had said acknowledging, identifying, and consolidating on your strengths is very important to the strategic process, right? Acknowledging, identifying, and consolidating on your strengths is very important to the strategic process. Extremely important. As you begin to understand that maze, for instance, let me use the example of the maze again. Sometimes for some people, you don't have the what it takes to untangle the knots. Let's say the knot is very, very tight, and your strength as an organization is not untangling a knot, but maybe you know how to melt things. Maybe your strength as an organization is that you have the tools and the resources to melt the knots, and maybe it's okay to just melt it instead of trying to untangle it. I'm just using that as an analogy. What does that mean? So again, let's go back to the energy industry. let's say you have the strength to build. Dangote, for instance, the Dangote group in Nigeria has been very good at creating that, even through the challenges in the Nigerian sector, the Dangote in the group has been very good at, building. Over the years. They've built all kinds of organizations, all kinds of manufacturing companies. And so because that has been their strength, they decided to take on the challenge of building a refinery in Nigeria that has been importing for decades, largely importing petroleum. Unfortunately, and ironically, we are one of the locations in the world where God put a lot of crude oil, but rather than optimize the value chain by processing the crude oil ourselves for decades, we've largely been exporting our crude oil and then re-importing. I've never seen something as inefficient as that. By very simple logic, it makes no sense, but that's what we've done for decades. And here comes Dangote saying, I have what it takes. The Dangote group saying, we have what it takes to be able to build a refinery. Why? It has been their strength. Creating, whether it was Dangote flour mills or the Dangote, it's manufacturing, building has been their strength. They've learned how to do that. So they could go into that energy industry in Nigeria and say, you know what, we have proven competence in building manufacturing industries and taking on the Gargantuan project, and they took it on, and honestly, they did well with it. Why am I drawing this example? Remember, again, articulating, identifying, and consolidating on your strength is very important to the strategic process. For them, it was strategic to take on that refinery because it was part of their strength. They have proven competence in this. They have demonstrable competence in this. They have demonstrated competence in manufacturing and building manufacturing industries. And guess what? Kudos to them. They have again proven that they can take on gargantuan projects like building manufacturing industries that help to optimize the value chain. This is still Tolu Omodere on Amoge Radio Communications. We are looking at roadmaps to organizational strategy. Today, we're emphasizing that you need to understand the environment. You need to understand the maze that you're trying to shine a light on. If strategy is like a light bulb that inspires action and guides decision making, you need to understand what you're shining the light on. You need to understand the aspect of the maze that you're trying to bring the light upon. Very, very important, right? So I want to also say something we said last week. We said every good strategy process always begins with an internal and external environmental assessment, right? It's been like the crux of today. Every good strategy process always begins with an internal and external environmental assessment. When you finish that assessment, then you can put forth the strategy, right? That has been the crux of today, like I said. Now, this light bulb should inspire and should guide. Strategy as a light bulb. If your strategy is like a light bulb, you should inspire action and then you should guide. If your strategy does not inspire action, I am not really sure it's a strategy. Imagine when Dangote came together with his probably top leadership, with his management team, and said, you know what, we can take this on. How do you think those that are true to his cause, how do you think they will have felt? Highly inspired, like, wow, we have a leader who is ready to take on a challenge that Nigeria has not sorted for a while. I would be inspired by such a leader. That's part of what your strategy as a light bulb should inspire action, and of course, it should guide decision making. What do I mean by guiding decision making? We've not gotten to one principle that we value a lot in Amoge when it comes to the strategy process, and that is the principle of strategic prioritization. We've not gone deep into it, and we're not going deep into it yet. However, let me point out something. Every time you are faced with opportunities, many times there could be more than one opportunity. Remember when I was giving the example of the energy industry, for instance, if you're going to renewable energy and you say, oh, we want to go into renewable energy, and that's your broad strategy. Within the renewable energy, there are several channels of renewable energy. There's solar, there's wind. Even in wind, there's offshore wind, there's onshore wind. Now, what does strategy do in terms of guiding decision making, and why is strategic prioritization critical? Many times you cannot do everything simultaneously and then do them effectively. I repeat, especially when you are at the beginning stage, you cannot do everything simultaneously and then do them effectively. I remember a client we were working with recently, and I remember my partner and I saying to the client that you are involved in too many things. You have to consolidate on your strength. You see, I keep using that word. It's very critical to the strategic process. Do you think that Dangote jumped into refinery from the beginning, or he first took on flour and so on and so forth? And as he consolidated this strength, he could now take on the next priority. Extremely important. I can use us in Amoyet as an example. I think about it almost a decade and a half ago in 2011, there were some things we already knew we're interested in. We knew we're interested in communications. We knew we're interested in Amogate radio and Amogate television. We knew that part of what we wanted to do was to take the knowledge and insights that we had gained and to communicate and to share. It was always a part of our strategy from day one. It was always a part of our vision from day one. Let me use the word vision. But was that what we started with? Definitely not. We started with consulting, private sector consulting, public sector consulting, working with non-profit sectors. We had to consolidate those strengths. We built frameworks. The leadership competency framework my colleague Adepeju Jayoba was sharing with you yesterday was developed 10 years ago, literally 10 years ago, 2014. And we worked with several organizations. We've worked with ECOWAS. ECOWAS, for those who don't know, is the Economic Community of West African States. We've bidded for jobs like with the German Development Agency, GIZ, and won such jobs, which is highly remarkable for us, you know, in certain dimensions, and so on and so forth. Imagine if we are trying to take on Amogate Radio Communications at the beginning. Number one, would we have as much resources to share with you as we do now? Very likely no. Very, very likely no. Would we have been able to consolidate on our strengths in consulting while trying to take on too many things simultaneously? Most likely no. Why is this important? I go back to what I said, and I'll say, I said strategy as a light bulb must inspire action, and number two, it must guide decision making. Very, very important. Now, why does it need to guide decision making? And this may be the point we'll probably wrap up on today, but please just follow me very carefully. This is extremely important. Your strategy as a light bulb that inspires and guides, you know, helps to guide decision making by breaking the possibilities into specifics, right? Remember the assessment. When one of the things the light bulb does is to, one, determine the current and coming opportunities in the market, as well as the critical limitations, and this could be political, economic, social, technological, legislative, or environmental, right? So when that strategy shines the light, right? When it shines the light on your current and coming opportunities, it then does two, also shines the light on how to navigate around the weaknesses of your organization and compensate for the weakness of your organization, especially as regards the present or potential opportunities in the market. Now, this sounds like a lot. Let me try to break it down in a few minutes, and we'll continue from here next week. Again, your strategy is supposed to be a light bulb, right? The light bulb should inspire action, right? Because imagine that people have been in the darkness of a maze for a long time, and all of a sudden the light comes. Even the shining of the light, it elevates their spirit, you know, brings motivation, brings inspiration. Like, oh, you mean this darkness can be broken? Yes, it can. So all of a sudden people are inspired to action, right? That's why, again, leadership is important here. Leadership is accountable for, you know, that inspiration and that motivation. However, after leadership does its best to bring that inspiration and motivation, the thing is also that after that, it should guide decision making, especially when you are at a crossroad. Now, at that crossroad, you may be faced with a number of opportunities in the market. After you've done a thorough assessment of current and coming market opportunities, present and potential opportunities, there could be more than one path to take. And this is where your strategy guides decision making. Very, very important. You know, let me give you an example. Again, I want to use the example of Amogate. We were building a path, you know, we were creating mentorship frameworks for nations, mentorship frameworks for organizations. These are things we're very passionate about, you know, especially as part of our leadership development strength. And at the time, we had 9 sessions of mentoring and mental health, where we have psychiatrists join us from the UK, from, you know, leadership experts join us from the US, some join us from Nigeria, and so on and so forth. You know, local, international, global. We had the first one, mentoring and mental health. We had the second, we had the third. We had nine successful webinars by God's grace, and people were calling for more. It was an opportunity. But guess what? Simultaneously, we're about to start the Amoge Radio Communications, which was always part of our vision from the very beginning. From 2008, when we were founded, our name was always Amoge Communications Consults. The communications was always part of our name as far back as 16 years ago. 2008 is now 16 years ago. So we're at a crossroad. Do we want to yield to this urge to continue with the webinars as of now, or do we want to begin what we thought the time had come for, which was Amoge Radio Communications? Well, the fact that you're listening to me today tells you the path we chose. Why? Because there was a strategy. There was a strategy that guided decision making, especially at crossroads. You're going to get to crossroads as an organization. You are going to get to those crossroads when there are possible paths you could take, and there could be more than one possible task, and that is where your strategy comes in. As much as possible, your strategy should guide decision making. Your strategy should help you to narrow down on what should be your strategic priority. What do you want to consolidate on? I can imagine there are several things Alhaji Dangote, as he's referred to in Nigeria, could go into. But when it got to that point, because maybe it had always been part of a vision to solve the energy, at least as far as the petroleum resourcing of energy is concerned, so help to contribute to the solving of that challenge in the nation of Nigeria. That guided decision making. When you get to those crossroads, your strategy should guide decision making. It's very, very, very important. Well, I think that this is where we are going to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program. Roadmap to Organizational Strategy. We have talked a lot today, as emphasized the need for strategy to guide, inspire action. Is a light bulb that inspires action, that shines the light on the maze, that helps you to really understand the dimensions of the maze, the complexities of the maze, the opportunities in the maze, the threats in the maze, and to now more or less juxtapose this, place this side by side with your own internal strengths and weaknesses as an organization, so that you know what you want to consolidate on, you know what you want to avoid, you also know what you want to prioritize. So your strategy should definitely inspire action, especially as you shine that light that breaks the darkness of the maze, but it should simultaneously guide decision. It should as well, it should likewise similarly guide decision making, especially when you get to the crossroads of opportunities. It should help you to determine what exactly should be coming first as you have taken your time to build an effective strategy. Wow, this is where we draw a curtain on today's edition of the program. I hope you have enjoyed this as much as I have. I hope you have also found this is inspirational in some form. I hope that you have also found this some kind of a guiding light as well, something to help guide you, something to measure the strategic planning processes. Next week, we are going to talk about how to create a strategy. Today, we have talked about what is strategy. Last week, we also talked a little bit about what is strategy. Next week, we're going to continue with how do you create this strategy. For now, I want you to please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. Also remember, we have these programs Monday to Friday, great programs. My colleague Abiodun Abari will be talking tomorrow about geopolitical economy, sports and the geopolitical economy. Thursday, we have another great program by Mr. Adiola Gbadebo. He will be talking about entrepreneurship and Nigerian youth, and of course, Dr. Titilola Ogunshona on Friday will be looking at core issues in economic development. You are the reason why we do this. We want you to please join us. We are very excited and very glad and grateful to have you with us, and we'll be back same time, same station next week. Until then, keep thinking strategy, keep thinking strategic prioritization, and keep thinking honestly strategic discrimination. The fact that you're prioritizing some things means you're discriminating other things, and we'll talk more about that next week. Thank you so much, and see you next week. Have a good one.